Very warm welcome back to the France 24 newsroom here in Paris. I'm joined here in the studio now by William Edwards, who's going to be giving us the latest business roundup. Morning, Will.
Hi, Catherine.
First, we're going to start off with the Chinese economy, which has been showing the world how it's done in terms of growth for a long time, slowing down recently, but you've got some new figures.
New GDP figures out this morning, and well, there's a couple of ways of looking at them really. Let's take a look at how things did over the year of 2012 as a whole. Firstly, doesn't look too good. In fact, 7.8 compared to 9.3% the year before, and actually that's the worst in 13 years. So pretty disastrous, you'd think, yeah? Well, actually, maybe not so much. This is how things have been going over the last few quarters, and you can see that things were declining, but for the last quarter of 2012, actually, things have started to bounce back again a bit. So actually on the up for the first time in around 2 years.
Okay, and has that had an impact on the markets at all?
Well, despite the details for the year as a whole, markets are very much focusing on the good news from that, as you could see with the markets opening up here in Europe. And it was even more of a strong reaction, actually, on the Asian markets, which have closed now. But you can see there the Nikkei in particular closing up 2.86%. Also helped by the fact that Chinese December retail sales were up 15% and industrial output up 10%, both figures better than expected. And earlier I spoke to our correspondent in Beijing, Shannon Van Sant. She said that despite the market optimism, there are still challenges for China.
Concerns about the economy still remain. Part of the reason why China's economy still remains slower than the 10%, the 9% growth that it's recorded in years below has to do with a number of factors. One is rising labor costs. That means more manufacturing is moving to other countries in Asia. Also, China's aging population. The population here is just getting older. And so there are less people to work in the factories. There's actually a labor shortage in many parts of China right now. And also because China has used different measures to artificially stimulate its economy over the last few years. And one of those measures is huge investments in infrastructure. These measures are not sustainable over the long term. So a slowdown of China's economy, a slow in the rate of its expansion is inevitable. China still faces many challenges over the next year for its economy. One is a potential real estate bubble, also worries about a shadow illegal banking system, which makes it hard for the government and for economists to track the money and to track what's really happening in the economy here. And also the global economy, and concerns about the global economy and what's happening in Europe and the US still persist, and that slowdown is still something that China is trying to counteract domestically.
Next, we're looking at Greece, where a list of Swiss bank account holders originally provided by France has rather set the cat amongst the pigeons. Former Finance Minister George Papakonstantinou is accused of removing family members of this list so that they could avoid being investigated for tax evasion. Jocelyn Vardy explains.
The mysterious disappearing relatives of former Greek Finance Minister George Papakonstantinou. When Greece's finances imploded in 2010, French authorities gave the Greek parliament the so-called Lagarde list, a list of names stolen by a whistleblower from HSBC Bank that detailed around 2,000 Greek nationals with Swiss bank accounts. The aim was to open a tax fraud investigation, but no action was taken. When Greece requested the list again from France, 3 relatives of George Papakonstantinou were found to have been removed from their original copy. The Greek parliament voted over Thursday night to open an investigation into Papakonstantinou for allegedly tampering with a public document and a breach of duty.
I did not tamper with anything, except for the fact that something like that would be contrary to my ethics. It would be illogical and stupid if it happened the way they allege it did.
Members of left-wing opposition party Syriza don't think the investigation goes far enough, seeing as Papakonstantinou no longer sits at the forefront of Greek politics. Others say it's important to keep an eye on the bigger picture and that the reason why Greek ministers did not immediately act on the Lagarde list when it came to them in 2010 must be looked into.
This is debasing, let's say, the parliamentary democracy. I mean, the big issue is wealthy people not paying taxes and being politically covered by the responsible ministers. This is the big issue.
Meanwhile, Papakonstantinou says he's the victim of a smear campaign. He says the relatives in question have already given evidence that their Swiss bank funds were legal and taxed.
Okay, well, we're staying in Europe for our next story. There's some good news from UK car manufacturers.
Yeah, perhaps surprisingly, UK manufacturers have seen record exports in 2012 as a whole, it turns out. That's despite sales in Europe actually slumping for their worst figures in 17 years. So why is this? Well, they've managed to get exports up 8% to 1.2 million vehicles, helped by the fact that they don't sell most of their cars to the EU. Actually, half of the vehicles produced in the UK go to the EU, and the other half go to other parts of Europe, but also China, the US, and of course other markets. So it's this more globalised outlook which has really helped UK car makers, as opposed to French car makers, which are heavily reliant on Europe, and in particular Southern Europe, of course, where the European debt crisis has hit hardest. So that's the difference, really, how they're having a record year in the UK, whereas in France, things are really going from bad to worse.
Okay, and we're going to finally look at something that really doesn't sound like a business story on the face of it to me. We're talking about the curse of the pharaoh, which has ended the career of a very successful Polish businessman. Do explain.
Yes, it does require explanation, doesn't it, that sort of headline. But The Curse of the Pharaoh is actually a movie. I have to say, Ludwik Sobolewski, he was the head of the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and he has been touched by the curse, you could say. He wanted to put his girlfriend in a movie, in this movie, The Curse of the Pharaoh, and apparently he's been accused of approaching companies listed on his stock exchange about financing this film. And the authorities say that this is improper use of his position, and as such, actually, he's been forced to step down.
Okay, and do you know when the film's going to be out?
No word on that, sadly.
Okay, I'm sure you'll keep us posted though.
I
Thanks
will
very
indeed.
much, William Edwards from the Business Desk there with the Business Roundup. And that's it from me for this half hour of news. Do stay tuned, plenty more coming up after the break with Lewis Hannah.